Chapter 1: The Early Years. Section 1: Osama bin Laden was born in 1957 in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, into a prominent and wealthy family. His father, Mohammed bin Laden, was a self-made billionaire who built a construction empire, earning respect and influence in the region. Osama was one of 52 siblings, the 17th child in a sprawling family. Despite this, he was raised with a sense of discipline and adherence to strict Islamic teachings. His family adhered to Wahhabi Islam, a conservative form of Sunni Islam deeply rooted in Saudi culture. Osama spent his early years in a privileged environment, enjoying wealth and luxury. However, his upbringing also emphasized modesty and spirituality. His father's emphasis on religion shaped Osama's character, instilling in him a sense of responsibility to Islam. Mohammed bin Laden's death in a plane crash in 1967 left a significant impact on Osama, creating a void that he filled by delving deeper into religious studies. By his teenage years, Osama was already showing signs of deep religious devotion. He attended elite schools in Jeddah, where he excelled in academics and displayed a passion for religious discussions. His peers described him as quiet and introspective, but deeply committed to Islamic principles. In 1974, at the age of 17, Osama married his first cousin Najwa Ghanem, marking the beginning of a personal life centered on conservative Islamic values. Despite his wealth, Osama's lifestyle remained simple, reflecting his religious convictions. He viewed Islam not just as a religion, but as a guiding principle for governance and societal structure. Section 2: Osama's ideological transformation coincided with major geopolitical events. The Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan in December 1979 was particularly pivotal. The invasion was seen as a direct threat to Islam, galvanizing Muslims worldwide to join the Afghan resistance. Osama saw this as an opportunity to put his beliefs into action. He began traveling to Pakistan and Afghanistan, where he connected with Afghan Mujahideen fighters resisting the Soviet occupation. Using his wealth, he provided financial and logistical support, funding weapons, supplies, and infrastructure. Osama also recruited fighters from across the Muslim world, persuading them to join the jihad. This period marked the beginning of Osama's transformation from a devout Muslim to a militant leader. He was no longer content with passive resistance. He believed in active engagement against perceived enemies of Islam. His actions earned him respect among the Mujahideen, who viewed him as a dedicated and generous supporter of their cause. Osama's time in Afghanistan also exposed him to the harsh realities of war. He witnessed the destruction caused by the Soviets and the resilience of the Afghan people. This further solidified his belief in the righteousness of jihad. He began to see himself as a defender of Islam, responsible for protecting Muslim lands and people. Section 2: Osama's higher education further shaped his ideological framework. He attended King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah, where he studied economics and business administration. These studies prepared him to manage his inheritance, but also exposed him to radical Islamic ideologies. Professors and scholars at the university, such as Abdullah Azzam, inspired Osama with the idea of jihad as a tool to protect Islam. During this period, the Muslim world was undergoing significant turmoil. The 1979 Iranian Revolution and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan marked a turning point for many Muslims, including Osama. These events fueled a sense of Islamic awakening, emphasizing the need to protect Muslim lands from foreign intervention. Osama began to distance himself from his family's business empire, focusing instead on religious and ideological pursuits. He was particularly influenced by the teachings of Sayyid Qutb, an Egyptian scholar who advocated for the establishment of Islamic governance and resistance to Western influence. Osama's early mentors instilled in him a belief that Islam was under attack from both external forces, such as Western powers, and internal corruption among Muslim leaders. This belief would become the cornerstone of his life's mission. He started funding Islamic causes, using his wealth to support charities, mosques, and educational institutions aligned with his vision. Section 4: By the early 1980s, Osama had become a central figure in the Afghan resistance. He co-founded Maktab al-Khidamat, MAK, with Abdullah Azzam, an organization that facilitated the recruitment and training of foreign fighters. MAK served as a precursor to al-Qaeda, laying the foundation for a global jihadist network. Osama's efforts were supported by the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan, who saw the Mujahideen as a tool to counter Soviet expansion. The CIA's Operation Cyclone provided funding and weapons to the resistance, indirectly benefiting Osama's activities. This alliance of convenience would later backfire, as Osama turned his attention to the West. During this time, Osama also began building a personal army, composed of fighters loyal to him. He established training camps in Afghanistan, where recruits were taught guerrilla warfare, explosives, and ideological indoctrination. These camps became breeding grounds for future jihadists, many of whom would join al-Qaeda. Despite the challenges of war, Osama thrived in the rugged terrain of Afghanistan. He developed a reputation as a fearless leader, often participating in battles alongside the Mujahideen. His commitment to the cause earned him the nickname Emir among his followers. Chapter 2. Rise of a Leader. Section 1. By 1984, Osama bin Laden's involvement in the Afghan-Soviet War had evolved beyond financial support. He took on a leadership role, personally overseeing operations and ensuring that recruits were adequately trained and equipped. His passion for the cause inspired loyalty among his followers. Fighters who joined his ranks described him as humble but deeply committed to jihad. Osama's ability to organize resources was unmatched. Using his wealth and connections, he built roads, dug tunnels, and constructed fortifications in Afghanistan. These efforts were crucial for the Mujahideen, allowing them to maneuver effectively against the Soviet forces. His reputation grew, not just as a financier, but as a warrior willing to share the hardships of the battlefield. Despite his growing influence, Osama remained deeply religious. He led prayers for his men and frequently quoted verses from the Quran to motivate them. He viewed the struggle against the Soviets as a holy war, a duty ordained by Allah to protect Islam. This conviction drove him to push harder, even as the war took a toll on his health and resources. Osama also began developing his ideology during this period. He believed that Muslims should unite under a single Islamic state, free from foreign influence. This vision extended beyond Afghanistan, encompassing the entire Muslim world. He saw the war as the first step toward achieving this goal, a test of faith that would ultimately lead to the liberation of Islamic lands. Section 2. The Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan. In 1989 marked a significant victory for the Mujahideen. Osama and his followers celebrated the defeat as proof of Allah's will and the power of jihad. However, the end of the war also posed challenges. With no common enemy to unite them, factions within the Mujahideen began vying for power. Osama returned to Saudi Arabia, where he was initially hailed as a hero. His contributions to the Afghan resistance were recognized by the Saudi government and the public. However, he quickly became disillusioned with the leadership of his home country. He criticized the Saudi monarchy for its alliance with Western powers, particularly the United States. The Gulf War in 1990 further fueled Osama's discontent. When Iraq invaded Kuwait, Saudi Arabia invited U.S. troops to protect its borders. Osama vehemently opposed this decision, offering instead to mobilize his Mujahideen fighters to defend the kingdom. His offer was rejected, deepening his resentment toward the Saudi government and its reliance on foreign military support. Osama's outspoken criticism strained his relationship with the Saudi monarchy. He began to openly challenge their legitimacy, accusing them of betraying Islamic principles. This marked a turning point in his life, as he shifted his focus from external enemies to what he perceived as internal corruption within the Muslim world. Section 3. In 1991, Osama was forced into exile, relocating to Sudan. This move allowed him to regroup and plan his next steps. In Sudan, he established a network of businesses and farms that provided financial support for his operations. He also began building alliances with other Islamist groups, laying the groundwork for a global jihadist movement. During his time in Sudan, Osama continued to refine his ideology. He viewed the United States and its allies as the primary enemies of Islam, accusing them of exploiting Muslim countries for their resources and imposing Western values. This belief drove him to escalate his efforts, shifting from regional conflicts to a global jihad against the West. Osama's activities in Sudan did not go unnoticed. Western intelligence agencies and regional governments began to monitor his movements, concerned about his growing influence. In 1996, under pressure from the United States and Saudi Arabia, Sudan expelled Osama, forcing him to seek refuge in Afghanistan. His return to Afghanistan marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. The Taliban, who had recently taken control of the country, welcomed him as an ally. This alliance provided Osama with a safe haven to expand his operations and train recruits. It was during this time that he formally established al-Qaeda an organization dedicated to global jihad. Section 4. Al-Qaeda's formation in the mid-1990s marked the culmination of Osama's efforts to unite jihadist groups under a single banner. The organization's name, meaning the base, reflected its purpose as a foundation for global jihad. Al-Qaeda aimed to coordinate attacks against perceived enemies of Islam, including the United States, Israel, and corrupt Muslim governments. Osama's vision for Al-Qaeda was ambitious. He sought to create a network of fighters and supporters who would operate across borders, united by a shared ideology. This required significant resources, which Osama secured through his wealth and fundraising efforts. He also established training camps in Afghanistan, where recruits were indoctrinated and trained in guerrilla tactics. Al-Qaeda's first major operation was the 1998 bombings of U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. These attacks demonstrated the organization's reach and marked the beginning of a campaign of violence against Western targets. Osama justified these actions as a response to U.S. policies in the Middle East, particularly its support for Israel and its military presence in Muslim countries. The attacks brought Osama to the forefront of global attention. He was declared the world's most wanted man, with a bounty placed on his head. Despite this, he remained elusive, using the rugged terrain of Afghanistan to evade capture. His ability to outmaneuver his enemies only enhanced his reputation among his followers. Chapter 3. The Declaration of War. Section 1. By the late 1990s, Osama bin Laden's rhetoric and actions became more aggressive. In 1996, he issued his first public declaration of jihad against the United States, accusing it of exploiting the Muslim world. This declaration, known as the Declaration of Jihad Against the Americans, occupying the land of the two holy places, was a rallying cry for Muslims to resist Western influence. The document cited U.S. military bases in Saudi Arabia as a grave offense, labeling them an insult to the sanctity of Islam's holiest sites. Osama accused the Saudi government of complicity, deepening his estrangement from the monarchy. The declaration positioned him as the voice of radical Islam, attracting followers from across the globe. Osama's ideology was rooted in the belief that the United States and its allies sought to undermine Islam. He viewed economic policies, military interventions, and cultural exports as tools of subjugation. This worldview painted a stark dichotomy between Islam and the West, justifying violent resistance. While the declaration drew criticism from many Muslim leaders, it resonated with those disillusioned by Western foreign policy. Osama's call for jihad began to echo beyond Afghanistan, inspiring a wave of recruitment for Al-Qaeda. His growing influence alarmed Western intelligence agencies, who began intensifying their efforts to track his movements. Section 2. In 1998, Osama issued another declaration, this time under the banner of the World Islamic Front. This fatwa, co-signed by other radical leaders, explicitly called for attacks against American civilians and military personnel. The document framed the conflict as a religious duty, urging Muslims worldwide to participate. This fatwa marked a significant escalation in Osama's campaign. It was no longer confined to grievances against U.S. policies in the Middle East, but extended to the broader Western world. The language was inflammatory, accusing the United States of waging a crusade against Islam and declaring jihad as the only solution. The timing of the fatwa coincided with increasing U.S. involvement in the Middle East, including its sanctions on Iraq and support for Israel. Osama skillfully leveraged these issues to justify his actions, portraying them as defensive measures to protect Muslims. Osama's declarations were widely distributed, amplified by emerging media networks. Al-Qaeda also began using videotapes and satellite television to spread its message, making Osama a household name. These efforts established him as the face of global jihad, further polarizing opinions about his cause. Section 3. The 1998 bombings of U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania were a direct result of Osama's fatwa. These attacks killed over 200 people and injured thousands, marking Al-Qaeda's first large-scale operation against American targets. The bombings were meticulously planned, involving coordinated explosions and extensive reconnaissance. Osama justified the attacks as a response to U.S. policies, particularly its military presence in the Arabian Peninsula. The casualties included both Americans and local civilians, a fact that drew widespread condemnation. However, for Osama, these deaths were collateral damage in a larger struggle. The bombings prompted swift retaliation from the United States. President Bill Clinton ordered missile strikes on suspected Al-Qaeda camps in Afghanistan and Sudan. While the strikes damaged infrastructure, they failed to capture or kill Osama, who had already fled to safe locations. The failure to apprehend Osama only emboldened him. He interpreted the U.S. response as a sign of weakness, further solidifying his resolve. The bombings and their aftermath highlighted Al-Qaeda's ability to strike on an international scale, signaling a shift in the nature of global terrorism. Section 4. Osama's focus now turned to planning even more ambitious operations. He envisioned attacks that would not only cause mass casualties but also symbolize the vulnerability of his enemies. His strategy involved targeting iconic symbols of Western power, aiming to create maximum psychological impact. Al-Qaeda's operations were meticulously planned, often taking years to execute. Osama emphasized secrecy and discipline, ensuring that only a select few were privy to the full details of each mission. This approach made it difficult for intelligence agencies to intercept plans. Osama also began expanding Al-Qaeda's network, forging alliances with other Islamist groups. These alliances provided logistical support, manpower, and access to new regions. Al-Qaeda's reach extended from North Africa to Southeast Asia, making it a truly global organization. Despite the growing pressure from Western intelligence agencies, Osama remained defiant. He continued to release statements, urging Muslims to join the jihad. His messages were carefully crafted, blending religious rhetoric with political grievances to justify his actions. Chapter 4. The Road to 9/11. Section 1. After the embassy bombings, Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda became the primary focus of Western intelligence. Despite heightened surveillance, Osama managed to evade capture, retreating deeper into Afghanistan under the protection of the Taliban. This period was marked by intense planning for an attack that would define his legacy. The September 11th attacks. Osama's vision for 9/11 stemmed from his desire to strike at the heart of American power. He identified symbolic targets that represented economic strength, military dominance, and political influence. This led to the selection of the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and the U.S. Capitol as potential targets. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, a key Al-Qaeda operative, proposed the use of hijacked planes as weapons. Osama approved the plan, recognizing its potential to cause mass casualties and global shock. He personally oversaw the selection of operatives, ensuring they were loyal, disciplined, and capable of executing the complex operation. The recruits underwent rigorous training in Afghanistan, focusing on aviation skills, covert operations, and the ideological justification for their mission. They were taught to view their actions as martyrdom, a sacred duty in the fight against perceived enemies of Islam. Section 2. In 2000, Al-Qaeda had finalized the operational details of 9/11. The chosen hijackers were sent to the United States, where they enrolled in flight schools and blended into local communities. They communicated with Al-Qaeda leaders using encrypted messages, ensuring that their plans remained undetected. Osama closely monitored the progress of the operation, receiving updates through couriers. He emphasized the importance of patience and precision, knowing that even a minor mistake could jeopardize the mission. His determination to succeed was unwavering, driven by his belief that the attacks would change the course of history. In the months leading up to 9/11, Osama recorded videos praising the operatives and justifying the planned attacks. He framed them as a response to decades of U.S. aggression in the Muslim world, including military interventions, economic sanctions, and support for Israel. These recordings would later serve as propaganda, rallying supporters to Al-Qaeda's cause. Meanwhile, intelligence agencies picked up scattered clues about potential attacks but failed to piece them together. The hijackers' activities aroused little suspicion, allowing them to proceed with their preparations undisturbed. This gap in intelligence would later be scrutinized as a critical failure. Section 3. On September 11, 2001, the attacks unfolded with devastating precision. 19 Al-Qaeda operatives hijacked 4 planes, crashing 2 into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center and 1 into the Pentagon. The 4th plane, United Flight 93, crashed in Pennsylvania after passengers fought back. The attacks claimed nearly 3,000 lives, leaving a profound impact on the United States and the world. The collapse of the Twin Towers became a symbol of vulnerability, while the scale of the destruction highlighted the reach of global terrorism. Osama's goal of creating a spectacle was achieved, but at an unimaginable cost. As news of the attack spread, Osama's supporters hailed them as a victory against the United States. In Afghanistan, Taliban leaders offered their congratulations, reinforcing their alliance with al-Qaeda. However, the attacks also triggered a massive backlash, with the U.S. vowing to hunt down those responsible. Osama's reaction to 9/11 was measured. In initial statements, he denied involvement, likely to protect al-Qaeda's network. However, he later released a videotaped confession, taking full responsibility for the attacks. This marked him as the face of global terrorism, cementing his infamy. Section 4. The aftermath of 9/11 was swift and severe. The United States launched the War on Terror, targeting al-Qaeda and its affiliates worldwide. Afghanistan became the first battleground, with U.S. forces invading to dismantle the Taliban regime and capture Osama. Despite the intense military campaign, Osama managed to evade capture. He moved frequently, relying on a network of loyal supporters to hide him. His ability to remain elusive became a symbol of defiance, further frustrating his pursuers. The U.S. response included sweeping changes to security and intelligence operations. The attacks led to the creation of the Department of Homeland Security and the implementation of the Patriot Act, which expanded surveillance and counterterrorism measures. These actions reflected the global impact of Osama's actions, reshaping the world's approach to terrorism. Osama's continued survival inspired both fear and admiration. For his followers, he became a symbol of resistance against the West. For his enemies, he represented the enduring threat of radicalism. The search for him became a priority, consuming vast resources and efforts. Chapter 5: The Manhunt. Section 1. Following the 9/11 attacks, the United States and its allies initiated a relentless global manhunt for Osama bin Laden. The CIA and other intelligence agencies turned their focus on tracking down al-Qaeda's leader, who had become the most wanted man in the world. Osama's ability to evade capture for nearly a decade would become a testament to his skill at hiding in the most remote and inhospitable regions of the world. The pursuit of Osama was complicated by the geographical and political landscape of Afghanistan, where he had found sanctuary under the Taliban regime. The mountainous terrain, combined with local tribal loyalties, made it difficult for foreign forces to operate effectively. The U.S. military relied on satellite surveillance, human intelligence, and drones to track his movements, but Osama remained elusive. In 2001, after the fall of the Taliban, Osama fled to the mountainous border region between Afghanistan and Pakistan, a sanctuary where he could hide in plain sight. Despite the massive effort to locate him, the U.S. was unable to apprehend him. This failure added to the frustration, especially as intelligence continued to point to his presence in the region. Meanwhile, al-Qaeda's operations continued to expand. While Osama's leadership was critical, his ability to inspire through media, especially videotapes and audio tapes, remained a powerful tool for recruitment and propaganda. As the years passed, al-Qaeda's decentralized network continued to carry out attacks worldwide, spreading Osama's influence far beyond the borders of Afghanistan. Section 2. Throughout the 2000s, there were numerous false leads and unconfirmed reports about Osama's whereabouts. The U.S. government worked closely with Pakistan, hoping to locate the al-Qaeda leader. But the lack of cooperation between the two nations proved challenging. The Pakistani military and intelligence services had their own interests and often turned a blind eye to Osama's presence, particularly in the tribal areas near the Afghan border. In 2004, a tape emerged in which Osama directly threatened the U.S. for its role in Iraq. The message served to remind the world of his continued existence and his ideological mission. As the years went by, Osama's health became a subject of concern. Some intelligence suggested that he had suffered from kidney failure, leading to speculation about his physical condition and how long he could remain hidden. By 2007, U.S. intelligence had begun to narrow down Osama's potential location. They believed he was hiding in the federally administered tribal areas, FATA, in Pakistan, an area beyond the full control of the Pakistani government. This region, home to militant groups, became the focal point of U.S. operations to locate Osama. Despite these efforts, Osama continued to evade capture. His leadership over al-Qaeda remained intact, and he became a symbol of the larger global jihadist movement. Section 3. In 2009, President Barack Obama took office with a renewed commitment to the fight against terrorism, including a specific focus on finding Osama bin Laden. The U.S. had suffered major setbacks in the pursuit of the al-Qaeda leader, but the Obama administration made it clear that eliminating Osama was a top priority. A new intelligence strategy was put into place, incorporating a greater use of drones in covert operations. By 2010, U.S. intelligence officials had identified a key lead: Osama's potential connection to a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. The compound, located in a wealthy suburb not far from Islamabad, was highly secured, with high walls, barbed wire, and limited access points. The unusual level of security raised suspicions, and analysts began to speculate that this could be the hideout of the world's most wanted man. A team of CIA operatives conducted months of surveillance on the compound. They tracked down a series of key individuals who had connections to the house, including a trusted courier who had previously served Osama bin Laden. The discovery of this courier and his regular visits to the compound cemented the belief that Osama was inside. The U.S. government was faced with a crucial decision: to act or wait. After careful consideration, President Obama approved the plan for a Navy SEAL team to conduct a raid on the compound. The operation, known as Neptune Spear, was set into motion with the goal of capturing or killing Osama bin Laden. Section 4. On May 2, 2011, U.S. Navy SEALs from SEAL Team 6 launched a covert operation to capture or kill Osama bin Laden. The team entered Pakistan under the cover of night, using helicopters to fly undetected into the compound in Abbottabad. The operation was meticulously planned, and the SEALs encountered little resistance upon arrival. As they breached the compound, the SEALs engaged in a firefight with Osama's security. Bin Laden was found on the 3rd floor of the compound, where he was confronted by the SEAL team. After a brief exchange, Osama bin Laden was shot and killed. His death marked the culmination of a nearly decade-long hunt and a major victory for the United States in the war on terror. The SEALs recovered numerous documents, digital media, and hard drives from the compound, which would provide crucial intelligence on al-Qaeda's operations and leadership. This material revealed Osama's ongoing influence and strategic plans, shedding light on his role in coordinating future attacks, even as he lived in hiding. Osama bin Laden's death was confirmed by President Obama in a televised speech later that evening. The news was met with both relief and celebration across the United States, with many seeing it as the end of a long chapter of terror and uncertainty. However, the death of Osama did not mark the end of the global jihadist movement, and his followers continued their efforts under new leadership.